Okay.
Okay. The separation of church and state is defined by Merriam-Webster as the act or state of keeping government and religion separate from each other. This is completely overlooked, however, every 4 years when the President of the United States, the head of our government, takes an oath on the Bible at his inauguration, declaring his religion in a land of freedom of religion outwardly to his country. This same practice is allowed during every courtroom event, forcing our citizens to once again take an oath on the Bible. The Constitution does not require this act, so why have politicians enacted something that directly contradicts a common principle in our government? My name is Madison Thomas, and I thoroughly believe and will argue that as long as the Bible is being used in legal situations to take an oath, there is not a true separation of church and state. A president is promising to preserve, protect, and defend our Constitution. That should be the document his hand graces at his inauguration, not a book that does not accurately represent all the groups of our country and all the groups the president is indeed serving. Thus bringing me to my first claim. The Bible is not an inclusive document to use in situations regarding the whole American public. Not everyone looks to the Bible as a sacred reading. Some look to other documents like the Quran, or simply see it as a secular piece of fiction. In a country that is so diverse, a piece of work that is only characteristic of one group is not proper for such an important event to the whole country. This circumstance also presents itself on a smaller level across courtrooms of America. For a witness taking a stand, they generally must place their hand on the Bible and recite, "I swear," or the person taking the oath may promise, "by Almighty God," or the person may name a God recognized by his or her religion, "that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." The proceedings taken in a court of law should not include a religious document nor the mention of God. I want to make it completely clear, I am not against the Bible or any other religious document. I am against using a religious document in a government situation. As CNN so articulately describes, the Founding Fathers made it clear that the U.S. Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. It is the living legacy they bestowed upon us. It is the framework for our government. And as such, that's the document our president should place his hand on. It should be clear to all that the president views the Constitution as our nation's genesis. As much as the president should acknowledge that the Constitution is the foremost important document to America, our judges should share the same viewpoint. Thus bringing me to my second claim. It feels as if the judges themselves are acknowledging that our citizens need not be truthful to our government, but only to God. It feels as if our judges believe the only way to get anyone to speak the truth is to make them answer to God. What should indeed be happening instead is each person to testify their hand on the Constitution in an effort to protect the guidelines our Founding Fathers created for us. Continuing these practices sets a negative precedent for the future. Seeing a president on national television swearing on our Bible insinuates that one must be religious to be president. I remember being a young child asking my mother if I became president if I would have to take an oath on the Bible, because we are not religious and it would go against my beliefs. She simply answered, "The country will never elect an atheist president. It seems as if it would go against tradition, and the public generally responds positively to the president being religious." There's an option in a courtroom situation where someone testifying does not have to take an oath, but can instead take an affirmation. Before this project and doing the accompanying research, I did not know this was an option, and if I was ordered to appear in court, would most likely have conformed and taken a religious oath. I imagine many others do not understand this is an option because of how unlikely it is for someone to refuse the Bible. To eliminate any uncomfortable situations, the Constitution should be the only document used in any judicial hearings. People should feel free to practice any religion they choose, or no religion at all. In a country of this religious freedom, our government should not indirectly enforce religion. If a separation of church and state is promised, judicial practices should not mix religion into our government. The Constitution is the most important document in our country and should be used to ensure our president serves to the best of his abilities, and that anyone testifying in a court of law should tell the truth and promise to uphold justice. As long as the Bible is being used in these situations, there is not a true separation of church and state. Thank you very much.
Right, well, I know what the topic is. The claim needs to be a little bit more specific as a proposition at the beginning of the speech, although I do think you back into it reasonably well. It's got a qualifying statement in it, and that makes it a little complicated. There's no preview of what the supporting structure is going to be at the beginning, so that makes organizational issues a bit problematic. One of the things that you should listen to when you're listening to your speech is the number of times that you use the word should or should not. This is supposed to be a claim of fact, not a claim of policy, and we repeatedly get claims of policy that are being introduced into the argument, and you can't use claims of policy to support a claim of fact. You want to be arguing that a harm occurs because of the use of the Bible as an affirmation, that the use of the Bible violates the separation of church and state, that the absence of any alternative undermines the faith or the believability of the witnesses in some way, or the political order in some way. That's how those claims need to be phrased. You want to avoid the policy implication that you have repeatedly through the presentation. The examples that you present are mostly hypothetical. They're okay. On the third point, what I thought was the third point, you mentioned that there is an alternative in the courtroom. You can just affirm that you were telling the truth, and suddenly that seems to me like it undermines all the significance of your first two arguments. If there is an alternative way of addressing this issue, then that seems like it addresses the problem without necessarily producing any particular harm. The idea, I think, behind taking an oath, whether it is to tell the truth or for political office, for instance, is that the person taking the oath has to give an affirmation by a standard by which we would assume that they are telling the truth or that they have faith in. So the selection of their oath tool, for instance, often reflects maybe the individual's needs as opposed to the community's needs. And the idea of separation of church and state here, I think, is being taken in a much more prescriptive way than I think you'll discover is supported by the courts. If there are legal arguments about that issue, that would have been good to include in the presentation, but I didn't hear any testimony from legal authorities talking about this issue. I didn't hear, other than the vague references to the court affirmation, I didn't really hear source citations about what is required in the courtroom. So I think you need to do a little bit more research on that. I can see that you have an issue that you feel passionately about, and you've got your own personal example that you use as an illustration. I did kind of appreciate the example, and you have the early examples of the president or people in the courts taking that, but those are all really, like I said, for the most part, very generic. The particulars would be useful if you have a particular harm that you're saying occur. Like you said, if people are going to feel excluded because they don't follow the faith of the president when they're taking the oath, that would be something that you need to document. I don't know why or who would feel that way. If somebody didn't use the Bible or did use the Bible or used the Quran or used something else as their instrument for affirming their willingness to do that. The idea of swearing on the Constitution might be a little bit problematic also, since I do believe that there are a couple of references to religious concepts there, so that might cross your line, and that would be a little problematic. All right, a little more reading than you want also. Okay, thank you.